Today, we're honored to welcome Tiffanie Janowitz to the show today. Very excited to have her on. She talks about so many different amazing topics that are in line with the show. It's about leadership, overcoming burnout, right? Because as high performers, we want to do a lot. We want to be of service and all these great things. But a lot of times, we don't have the tools to have this life of balance, right? And really learning the skills of these things can be very beneficial. And really talking about principles to overcome certain things such as overworking, all these things that come into synergy, right? I'm very happy to have her on, share her insights. And today we're going to walk away with practical takeaways in order to fortify our minds and really become the best versions of ourselves. So how are you doing today, Tiffanie?
Doing well. How are
I'm
you?
doing great. Yeah, I'm
Good.
very
Thanks
excited
so much
about
for
this.
having me.
I'm very curious to hear your story and how you got into leadership and finding your voice and being of service today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born a natural leader. I am the youngest of 8 children, which when you hear that, usually you're thinking like, oh, like you're the youngest and things are kind of handed to you and everything. But I actually had the opposite experience by being the youngest of like really finding an independence right out of the gate of like, I was self-serving, right? Right out of the gate was really observing like, with my older siblings, what do I want to do? What do I not want to do? And kind of cherry picking like what I wanted my life to look like. And so it really gave me an ability to like write a blueprint for myself right out of the gate on my personal side of things. So that was like my natural leadership was just kind of formed and tailored, around my upbringing years and everything. And then I stepped into a career early fresh after fresh after college, excuse me, I stepped into investments, which was a little bit unexpected, but because I got my degree and I was headed down like the health route. And so that's where I was planning on pursuing my career and everything. And then just life took me in a different direction shortly after I graduated. And I stepped into an investment role and I was in that role for about 15 years. But being in investments, what that really taught me was like the framework for a lot of things professionally that then tied into our personal lives. It really showed to me that like the work-life balance thing really is not an existing thing. In my life, I try and help people ditch the word balance and I try and help them intertwine integration instead. I think it's a lot healthier, and as high achievers, it helps us really delegate our energy a little bit more efficiently and kind of ditch some of the negative connotation with it. So anyways, I was able to really lead that team of investors that I worked with. I was with a team of 5 very high performing men. And so being a woman on that team gave me a different angle to really be observant and lead them in a way that they weren't getting from each other. So evolution just kind of came from that. And then I found myself in a state of feeling like I needed more and that I was meant for more. And I feel like that's it's a big moment that a lot of us get into, but we get the choice of whether to listen to that or not. And I'm really grateful that I was confident enough in like my ability to listen to my voice at that point and took a turn with my career. And that's really when I stepped into personal development, into the entrepreneur space, business development, and everything like that. So that was a very long-winded story for you of how I got there, but
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love it. I
yeah.
mean, it sounds like we have plans a lot of times, but life has other plans for us,
Oh yeah.
right?
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's like we're exactly where we're supposed to be, right? It's like I go along this path, and then it ends up being better, right? We learn from these experiences, and they're all kind of designed to kind of forge our character and to live a life we're meant to lead, right? And
Hmm.
being in like investments and all that and overcoming that's awesome for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the concept of like that life's going to throw curveballs in there. That is so true. And I think that when you're given those curveballs, you get the choice of like, okay, am I going to look for the opportunity here, or is this curveball going to crush me right now? Or, and we get the choice of going in 2 different directions. And that is something that I love working with people around, to be able to see and like face their challenges head on, to be able to come out on top from that, because the challenges are not going to stop in life. That is
Right.
that is one certainty, is we'll have them forever.
Yeah, I like how you said there's always a choice, right? Because we have a choice
Yeah.
within these things. And I like to say the obstacle is the way, right? Like what's in the way becomes the way. And we just kind of get to choose based off of that and really being the victor of the circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it is. It's like, you get to choose and take yourself into a circumstance where like you want to learn from somebody, right? Do you want to learn from somebody who has had all the obstacles thrown at them and figured out the way? Or do you want to learn from someone that's like, well, I've read a lot of books and I think that this is how it is, but like I haven't had many challenges for myself, and everybody feels different about this, but I certainly am one that like the mentors that I've had in my life that I've learned the most from are the ones who have walked through fire.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's like when you're looking for something to learn from and mentors, you want to find someone who has been where you want to be and has walked the path you want to walk on, right? Because all this knowledge, it's like, it's not going to be the same until you put it into experience, right? Like knowledge is not power. Knowledge applied is power and wisdom, right? So it's knowing these things and applying in your own life.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, for real. So you talk about burnout a lot, like in high performance, right? And I feel like this is very common because we think of this a lot in terms of business, right? We go for all these things, we want to be successful, but a lot of times our health kind of fails, or relationships, all these things. And you really talk about integration. So you want to get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this topic. It's actually so I've developed a framework actually around the concept that we're talking about, because how often are we using the word fine? Right? Like, oh, I'm fine. And it's almost like this default response that we give people, or that we often hear. I mean, even down to the point of like passing someone in and saying, hi, how are you? How often it was just like, I'm fine, how are you? And then you go on your merry way. Like, well, did we even really want to have this conversation? So anyways, I really sat and wrestled with the word fine for a long time, because I was like, what does the state of fine mean? What does that word mean? And why do we, as high performers or business owners, fall into that state of like letting our business just be fine, or letting our life just be fine? And so anyways, I really sat into that and was like, I really believe that that's where burnout starts, is when we let ourselves sit in a place of feeling fine for too long, because that's when we start to like numb out or get exhausted, or, I've actually created an acronym around that. So like if you're feeling fine, it's typically from like a place of fear, insecurity, numbness, or exhaustion. And typically, like when you think of that, you're just like, oh yeah, I don't want to be in a state of fine. I want to be free. I want to be excelling. I want to be progressing. And we can't do that if we're idling. So. Right.
Yeah. I love that. So it sounds like a lot of us, we just kind of settle for these things. So we kind of almost get used to mediocrity in a sense.
Yeah.
And it was like, because we strive for more a lot, but then it's kind of like a plateau, right? We just kind of live like that essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard someone describe the word mediocrity as like, what did they say? It was like, that's actually our worst chronic illness in America, is the feeling of mediocrity. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Because it is. If we're settling for mediocrity, you're letting go of so much greatness that you are absolutely capable of. And again, that's where I really love like working one-on-one with people, to be able to help them realize and wrap their like eyes, ears, soul around the concept of we are all meant for so much more, but you have to have the right tools to uncover that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We're meant for greatness, right? And
Yes.
like we're not living up to our full potential in many ways for a variety of reasons. It could be due to our past, due to lack of knowledge, or just just kind of feeling cut adrift, right? Not really being in touch with our purpose and what is real, and all these things that kind of work in synergy together.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's say someone's in that state, right? Maybe they're just kind of going along in their lives. They've been used to this paradigm. They just think this is how it's supposed to be, but they feel there's something more. What can they do to actually take steps to get out of that state?
So I think that that's the most beautiful place and like crossroad to come to, of the feeling of like, I think I'm meant for something more. Because what's happening there is you're becoming aware, and no change can be made until you are made aware that something needs to shift, right? So like when we're in that state of mediocrity and state of fine, that's the most dangerous place to be, because you're in a place where like there's not a catalyst big enough to make change. But then when you go a little bit further and you start to feel that internal pull of like, oh, I'm meant for more, this place isn't really feeling like it's in alignment with me any longer. I think some people feel that and they're like, they get a little nervous and they feel like they need to shut it down because it can feel nerve wracking. But what that's doing is like, that's your own inner voice letting you know, like, we're ready to shed some layers. And that's not a negative thing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. That means you're ready to grow. So anyways, going back to what you were saying, like it really brings you to a place of awareness, and that's where any change has to happen. And so I would say really listening to that and be very mindful, turn that lens right around and keep it inward when you're feeling a feeling of I'm meant for something more. Well, what does that look like? What would that feel like? What would that like? Get visualizing and see what in a dream state, what would that be in your ideal world? And let your mind wander. And journaling about that, or praying, meditate, whatever your state of like being mindful is a really powerful tool to couple that with.
Yeah, I love that. It's like having a self-awareness, right? Knowing where we are, of course, but then where do we want to be? Just listening to that, just taking those steps. And it was always a process. So it's kind of, it's becoming more of who you already are, right? It's like reaching your goals, and like a lot of times it's who you become in that process too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when we're talking about change like that, you've got to make steps to go to become that next person, to become that future self, right? And those are really like, that's where when I'm talking and teaching people around the concept of infrastructure and integrating that into your life, that's really where that's rooted from of, okay, I've sat and I've wrestled with this concept of I'm wanting some change. I'm wanting to pour into more of something. What does that look like? And then we've sat through this visualization of like, okay, what does this next future self look like? What do what habits do I do each day? What type of life am I leading? Where am I living? Who am I interacting with? And you've painted this picture. Well, now we need to get from point A to point B. And building that infrastructure to bridge that gap and make the bridge that you get to walk over to become that future self is a process that's an underestimated process that maybe doesn't look like shiny, lovely objects, but that's where the change is happening in those everyday moves that are very small micro habits and micro choices that all add up. I like to use the phrase like brick by brick because that's how foundations are built, right? But yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, I like that. I see what you mean now with the infrastructure, right? Because it's a lot of us, we don't necessarily have a plan, right? It's like,
right.
What do you believe? What do you value? What are your standards? All these things, they really matter. And you go from there. It's taking those small steps. Again, it's not about being perfect. It's about making that progress.
Yeah. We're not ever going for perfection. That's the boring route. We'll kick that. And you want to get in the trenches and feel what that looks like and wrestle with all the emotions of that. Change can be scary, but it also can be so invigorating.
Yeah, 100%. So again, we're in that state, and now we're kind of moving out of it a little bit. We starting to realize there's something more. Like we're meant for more. We're meant for greatness and all these types of things. But they just kind of feel stuck, right? Maybe there's some roadblocks, and again, these challenges. There's always part of the process, right? A lot of times we look at failure as like, oh, this is it, and we're done. But no, it's like a lot of times it's just education. What can I do better, in a sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always love to walk out of a failure as looking at that and looking at it as an opportunity, And again, going back to like when those failures come up, we were talking at the beginning of this of like there's choices to be made when roadblocks come up, right? And that a choice can be made when we fail too, because as humans we're going to fail. We can't. It's unrealistic to not think that we're not going to fail, right? But then we have two choices of like, okay, I failed. I fell flat on my face. How quickly am I going to get up? And then what am I going to take away from this? Instead of having it be stamped as some shameful thing that has happened in our life or, a failure as a negative thing, like, okay, so to your point, what can I learn from this? It's data collection. And all of our data is very unique to ourselves. But the sooner we can wrap that failure, like wrap our mind around that failure of like, okay, I just pulled so much knowledge from this that maybe I'm not going to repeat it in the future, or I can do this better going forward. Or, I mean, that's the data collection. It also eases up on ourselves a little bit, and then we're not so hard on ourselves for
Right.
whatever failures in front of us. It's like, we're all human, it's going to happen, but getting back up is the point of it. And really, that's where I think the difference maker is between like the high achievers that I work with versus like, the people that won't give themselves the grace enough to like start learning from those failures. That's a really big one to overcome, because if you won't be willing to fail and get back up, you're going to find yourself in a really big hole.
100%. Yeah. It's all about that resilience, right? It's the ability to bounce back. Because as I mentioned, these things are going to happen. And it's important to give ourselves a grace, right? Because a lot of times we want to beat ourselves up in these things.
Yeah.
And that is usually very unproductive, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's our default. And
Yeah.
having compassion, all these things actually helps your brain get in that state of where you can actually learn and ask
Mm-hmm.
questions to get to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because our brains, like our brains have our natural survival mechanism in there, right? And your brain defaults to like a fear protected base. Like that's our natural instinct. And so it really does take practice to look at things in the state of positivity or abundance or whatever that lens is that you need to put on, right? But our brains are also really powerful in the fact of like, if you do put that practice in motion, even if you are lying to yourself at first and you're just making yourself be positive. I've worked through with a couple people. They've had some really difficult things happen to themselves over and over and over, and they're exhausted. When we first start working together, like they're at that point of, they're like, I have nothing left to give. And when you're in that state, it does kind of take ourselves coaxing in our brain, like, okay, what's something small that I can look at today that is going to be positive? And it's that concept of like, what you focus on grows. And so if I focus on one little thing, then I've told myself I can be positive, so then I can repeat it. And that neural pathway can start getting bigger, and we can kind of close that negativity and the exhaustion loop that people get stuck in so often. So the brain's amazing.
100%. Yeah. It sounds like focusing on the small wins throughout the day, like those glimpses of victory and just having gratitude and taking advantage of the space throughout the day, right? Because a lot of times we just fill our mind with these distractions, but if we can actually give ourselves a space to think and, activate the default mode network in the brain, just kind
Yes.
of solve problems and relax, that's where the magic takes place.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with someone yesterday about the default mode in the brain, and it's such an underestimated place to put ourselves. We get too task oriented and we get too checklist oriented. It's like, no, we've got to go back into that default mode and let ourselves open up and be creative. And
Yeah, we just have like so much cognitive load from everything. Like there's media, there's all everything that goes into all the distractions that we have to come across, and it's so hard to actually tune into what is real. Like if we don't have a base of who we are, it's like it's very easy to be scattered in today's world.
oh yes, yeah, there's a lot of noise in today's world, that is for sure. And I think that that's one thing, that if you are finding yourself in a place of like that, feeling that overwhelmed loop, or like you were saying, even if you're finding yourself in that place of, maybe you're not in the overwhelmed loop, but you're finding yourself in the state of feeling like you're ready for something more, then I would really urge you to be very protective of what you do consume. Be very protective of the things that you let influence you, because when you're in a state of change and shaping something new, the things that you want to be consuming in our very noisy world, it's easy to go down those slippery slopes, and then all of a sudden you've been doom scrolling for 2 hours or whatnot, but be intentional about your time. And it's a big concept with burnout is time and energy delegation, and you being the dictator of that and not letting the day dictate you.
Yeah, 100%. Just being mindful of what we watch, what we listen to, all these things that matter so much, just being protective of your energy, right? So we can actually invest in the things that matter to us, as
Yes.
opposed to, majoring in minor things, right?
Yeah.
It's insane, right? And
Oh yeah.
along with that, like in terms of burnout, like we think of balancing everything, right? But you say that it's not really about that, it's about integration. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So with integration, I really I really strengthened this concept once I stepped into the world of entrepreneurship and like business ownership, right? And I think that this is important even if you're in a 9 to 5. I think that the concept of integration is really important because there's a lot of learning, like we were just saying, like there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of energy that we want to output each day. However, we all have a finite amount of energy. You have the same 24 hours that I do in my day, and how we spend that is going to really dictate how we feel at the end of the day. And what I mean by that is, how am I going to feel in, let's just make it easy and call it like the 5 buckets of health, right? When we're talking about the 5 pillars of health and I'm doing some reflection at the end of the day, how did I feel about what I did physically that day, mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually? If I can look over those and feel like I'm feeding them in a way that I'm proud of, then my integration is working. Now, when I say that, I don't mean like when I'm talking about those 5 buckets, everything gets a 20% range. Like that's not what I'm saying, because some days I'm going to have, my spirituality is going to feel at 80%, right? And then maybe my financial aspect is going to be like more of a 20%, right? But what I mean is, if I am proud and feel satisfied with the output of energy that I have put into each of those areas, then I'm integrating my life well, right? So as a busy mother, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a business owner, I'm a mentor, I'm a speaker. I wear many different hats each day, but what's very most important to me at the end of the day is that my family is taken care of, right? Like my family and being a provider for my family is one of my core values. That's what leads me, and that's a big why for me, right? Well, if I have not spent enough time with my son at the end of the day, I'm not going to feel great about integrating all of the different things. I may have had an incredible day as a business owner, but if I haven't supported my family in the way that I'm proud of, then the business ownership is not going to make up for that, right? So there's a lot of layers that we have to look at. And again, it's a lot of time delegation, and the practice of being present. So wherever I am and whatever I've committed my energy and my time to, I'm also committed to giving 100% to that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I like the way that you framed it, right? Because it's like having this self-inventory, like how are we spending our time, how are we investing our energy? And a lot of times, like if we don't do these things, then like we may not be aware of how we're not investing in this one thing we really want to, and it may go on for a while, kind of like we alluded to earlier, just kind of being fine, right? Yes. And so just knowing these things and having that self-awareness is so key.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is. It's like, okay, so if it happens once, that's fine. It's going to happen. It will happen once. We're human. And again, talking about failures, like the failures are going to happen. But when we let ourselves fall into a pattern of like, okay, now I've gone a full week without moving my body. Okay, moving my body for me is not about the gym body I'm working out, that I'm walking out of the gym with. Moving my body for me is about the mental clarity and what's happening in my mind. It's giving me the ability to be present and to make sound decisions in leadership. And so again, if I'm like, okay, I missed the gym today, okay, that's okay. Make sure it happens tomorrow, or just get back on track. It's the concept of picking back up and resetting.
That mind-body connection as well, because a lot of times, like, we don't see how these work in synergy, right? Because we may not be doing, certain things in our health and wellness. Sometimes we don't understand how that's influencing other things like our relationships, right? So it's about like integrating all these things, understanding that nothing is separate, right? We need it all, and just being aware of that and just making that progress is where it's at for real.
Yeah. And I think a really, really big underlying piece of all of this is being truthful to yourself. So when we're talking about like all of this is connected, there's also the connection and the underlying piece of like, are you being truthful to yourself about where all of these pieces are currently sitting in your life, and where do you want them to go, right? It's kind of like about tying into that future self and about that future identity that you're working toward. And we all hopefully are working toward progression each day, but if I'm saying, yeah, I want to be, and I'm visualizing this, this person as my future self and connecting myself to this future identity, but then I'm not actually taking steps to get there, then I'm not being truthful to myself. And that will weigh on you also, of like the mind body connection and the progression that's happening all around. Is it are you going to keep progressing, or are you going to hit a place of like, I'm living a fraudulent life?
Right. Yeah, it's like having that honesty is so key, because I don't know if you see this, but I feel like a lot of people, they're not giving themselves permission to actually go for what it is they actually want, right?
Yeah.
They think they're supposed to do these things, but I don't know if this life is for me. I don't know if it's possible, right? But no, it is. You just gotta keep going, and you have to believe. You have to have that conviction within yourself.
Yeah, those self-limiting beliefs can be so crippling, and when we're trying to get past those, like, it's so helpful to have people to be able to work through that with. Self-limiting beliefs they're frustrating and they're difficult, and they're going to come, but when you have the right tools to be able to open up your mind, like you're saying, and see your greatness, that is where you get to start unlocking the powers. And it's a delicate dance of being able to say, like, okay, am I shutting down my voice to be able to listen to somebody else's? And that's really where, like, the self-advocacy for me has come into play, of if I'm not using my own voice and I'm not being a self-advocate for myself, then I'm costing myself something. And then we find ourselves in that space of like, am I really in alignment to myself? Am I working toward the things that are my goals and not someone else's goals? So, and again, it circles back to truth, but your voice is so big with this process.
100%. So you mentioned self-advocacy. So can you define that and what that actually means for people, and actually how we actually can start to do that in our own lives? How does that process begin?
Yeah. For any practice to be successful, we need to start in small steps. So if the principle of being an advocate for yourself is a foreign principle, I'm not going to have a conversation with you and encourage you to speak up in a big crowd or speak up in a hard conversation. That's going to feel very overwhelming and intimidating to you if this isn't a practice that you've put into motion already. Instead, I'm going to encourage you to take smaller steps to prove to yourself that you can actually use your voice. And what I mean by that is, what have you committed yourself to doing for yourself that you either are or are not fulfilling right now? So let's take the example of the alarm clock. It's an example that comes up all the time, right? But like, if you're one that uses an alarm clock and you set an alarm and then the alarm goes off and you hit the snooze button and you roll back over and go right back to sleep, you're not showing up for yourself very first and foremost out of the day, right? And so that is kind of shutting down that self-advocacy. You're not going to bat for yourself. You're shutting it down first thing in the morning. And it sounds like that sounds very dramatic. Like, you just hit the snooze button and you're telling me that now I can't self-advocate for myself. But it's these little wins throughout the day. Like you said, like looking at the little pieces each day that we can add up, that really makes a big difference when it comes to something big. So I'll take a minute to share a big journey on this for me. Was I made it a practice through the last 15 years to really find my voice. And that started small. It started with small things of just like saying no when I wanted to say no to something. If people are like a people pleaser by nature, saying no is a difficult practice. And that's something that you really have to like actively use the word no and turn down something that, like, if it doesn't feel in alignment to you and it's easier to just go with the flow, but then you're going to, show up and say no, that's a big win for yourself. Anyways, I spent the last 15 years through a lot of my career path and just personal experiences too, reshaping my identities multiple times. And what I mean by that is just like, I kept outgrowing the identity that I was sitting in, and I let that be okay. I let myself go to a new level each time. But because I let myself really practice the concept of using my voice and saying no when I wanted to, or showing up for myself. If I committed to something, whether it was for myself or to show up for something else, I was there. And it was these wins that kept telling myself, okay, I'm in alignment. I'm telling myself the truth. I can tell others the truth. I can show up as my authentic self and feel like I'm going to stay in alignment, right? And that, that didn't come with its own it came with its own challenges, of course, because that's just how life is. But then a year ago, I was faced with some health issues, like we were talking about. There's different issues that are going to come up in life, and I was faced with some health concerns, and a couple of the physicians that I went and saw started to just dismiss those health concerns. And if I wouldn't have practiced some of these small micro habits and micro wins, and I wouldn't have been so conscious of that, I would have taken their word and I would have been like, okay, and just listened to them, because at that point it would have been easier. It would have been a lot easier to just listen at that point. But I felt that inner pull, right? What we were talking about at the very beginning of this, like, nope, there's something more here. And it wasn't that it was like I'm pulling for something exciting more, but I felt that there was something, my concerns were in line with what my body was telling me. And I was having someone else outside of my body shut down my concern. So I felt myself at that crossroad of, okay, am I going to shut my voice down because they're telling me I'm okay? Or am I going to listen to myself where I am feeling in line still and my body's still talking to me? So it's time to say, can we look further? And I did. And thank goodness I did, because it ultimately saved my life. When I pushed back, I was able to get some more tests, and it turned out that I had a breast cancer diagnosis that was being dismissed. And if I wouldn't have kept pushing, it would have cost me not only time, but it would have cost me, much more. It would have gone into a much severe stage. It could have cost me my life. I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole on that one, of course, but that's a very big example of using your voice. And that's why I say, like, if this is not a practice for you that is a common everyday thing, then it is very important to start in those small spaces and start in those small wins. But the reason it's so important is because we are all going to have that stopping moment in our life. And it may not be medical, it may not be financial, it may not be any of those things, but it's going to be a moment that, are you going to be ready to speak up for yourself? Or are you going to be ready to say, okay, I'm listening. What does this mean for me right now? And it's a really interesting place to be in, but it's a powerful place if you've prepared.
Wow, yeah. That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's like, it sounds like keeping your word to yourself and showing up for yourself is key, right? Living in alignment. And, it's kind of like you're training, right? Getting small wins in. And then when it's times to have this big thing happen, you're going to be ready, right? So you stay ready in a sense. So you don't have to get ready. And it's kind of like living in a process, living in the flow, and you make that progress. And then when the opportunity comes, you're going to be ready for it. So that's a really important point there.
Yeah. When the stopping moment comes in each of our lives, that is not the time that you want to say, oh crap, I need to prepare right now. You want to be ready, and you want to be able to think clearly and make sound decisions and not have to react to the whole situation, but instead be able to say, okay, I've built tools in place for myself to support my mental health or my emotional health, or even, like we could go down so many different avenues with that. But the preparation is key, and it is like the monotonous things that we have to do each day, and the habits and everything to support whatever that identity is that you really want to be living and breathing each day.
Yeah, so mastering those fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be great at anything, you have to master the fundamentals, master the basics. You want to be fancy and everything, right? But it's really, no, it's like the small wins, like eat real food, right? Move.
Yeah. Yes.
Get high quality sleep.
Yeah.
It's like we're going to be amazed in how we just skyrocket in our lives if we just get those basic things down.
It really is like those. It's. I love that you just went to those couple things too, because when I work, one of the first things that I do with people, like when we sit down to mentor with each other, we're doing a lot of data collecting, right? So I'm asking a lot of questions and more so to just understand where that person's at, because then we get to make the roadmap at that point, right? But the first 5 areas that I truly look at with people is like, okay, what does your sleep look like? What does your movement look like? Where's your gratitude? And we're looking at those foundational pieces, because those are the important things that let us master ourselves and our everyday interactions and everything. And if those are chaotic, nothing else matters. We have to dial that in.
Yeah, I mean, we would be surprised at how much we can actually solve in our lives from a mental standpoint if we just take control of our health. Like, we don't really understand that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
why is it that you expect to feel well if you're eating the standard American diet? Like, it's kind of shocking.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty wild what we expect of ourselves if we're not the input and output concept that we were just talking about. If we're not inputting the good stuff, then how are you expecting your brain and your body to show up at this high performing capacity?
Yeah, I mean, we can do it because as humans, we're so resilient, right? We have so much potential. But how do we stack the conditions in our favor to make things easier and actually reach our full potential and maximize our capabilities?
Yeah.
And so everything is connected for sure.
Yeah. For me, I would so much rather save those decision-making moments for big decisions that matter in my day, in whether it's big business decisions or, decisions to support my family or whatever. I would so much rather save my brain capacity to make those big decisions rather than come up in front of myself and be like, well, what am I going to eat today? Or how much sleep am I going to get tonight? I'm actually exhausted because, take those variables out, eliminate those variables, and you will eliminate that decision fatigue that we get to face every single day. Save that fatigue for the decisions that matter.
Exactly. Like, we have so much decisions that are just, unimportant, and we have to be mindful of our energy again. Like, the decision-making fatigue is real. So that's like, going back to high performance, is like automation and things that just you can have in like an automatic or a framework. So you actually have decisions to make within that framework as opposed to just like doing whatever. It's like so many skills to this, but it's always a process, and it can be very fun as well to learn these things,
Yeah. So sorry, 1 second. Hey, buddy, can you go find Mama?
I don't know.
I think she's in the garage, okay? You go on. Thank you, sweetie. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So there was another thing I wanted to mention, like when it comes to living in alignment, right? Like, sometimes we have imposter syndrome because we actually are, right? I don't even know how that sounds, but what I mean by that is, we, like, for speaking, right? Say,
Yeah.
because a lot of us were afraid of public speaking, right? But like, I just find that if we actually strengthen every area of our life, like if we take control of our health, our mind, our character, all these things, like, they show up for you at a time you actually need it the most.
Yes.
Right. So we have to actually live in alignment. It's like, you know who you are, and you know what you stand for, and you know that you have a purpose, and you have a message that actually matters, and you just live by
Yes.
that, and as best as you can. It's always a process too.
Yeah, absolutely. When I work with people and that's another exercise that we do early on is like, what is your core value system? What does that look like for you? Can you list out your core values, and do you know them? Like, are they so in line to your core that you get to base every decision off of that? And, when we go back to the fatigue concept and we go back to like burnout and everything, if you've defined that core value system, that makes decision making a hell of a lot easier, because
Yeah.
it's either in alignment or it's not. So to your point, when we're facing the imposter syndrome concept, typically what's really interesting also about imposter syndrome is like, you're feeling that because you've just stepped in the room that you should be in. So if you're feeling that and you're now in a new room or something that is challenging you to feel that imposter syndrome, well, then it's like, okay, let's look inward for a second. Why am I feeling like this? Oh, I'm feeling like this because this is challenging me in this way. This is what I've been wishing and working for. And this is going to tie this into my future and new identity that I'm stepping into. So imposter syndrome can be reframed into a very exciting catalyst for you if you let it, if you make the choice for it to be, right?
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like that cognitive reframing, right? Because a lot of times, like, initially we think of these things, and because a lot of times, like, it doesn't necessarily have meaning except for the meaning that we give it, right? So
Yeah.
they come up in our minds initially, but how can we reframe that to actually be more empowered? Like, in terms of speaking, like, how can I actually be excited? Because a lot of times, like, the same hormones that are being produced, but it's kind of the feeling, right? So instead of feeling stressed, how can I become excited, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it amazing the story we tell ourselves? And
Yeah.
it can make or break an experience for you. It can
100%.
make something so powerful, or it can make you feel so small so quickly. but that is, it's a really incredible concept that like just reframe some things.
Yeah. It's being connected to what you want as well, like connecting these things to what matters to you, right? So if you're going through something, like how can I be of service with this? Like how can I embrace it and learn from this and actually, teach these lessons, right? So it's like now you start to embrace these things and you kind of like show up in a bold manner so you can actually express what is possible in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
And again, it's like something that you have to practice. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So for people that are listening to this, that is like, oh, that's so far ahead of where I'm at. You have to start somewhere with it, right? And it's just reframing small things to then add up to bigger things that gives you the capability and the confidence to reframe bigger things. But the whole point is we all have to start with something. The concept of something over nothing is so powerful, because I'm not going to expect someone to reframe a very big situation in their life if they can't reframe like some of the smaller everyday movements that they're doing. And so the concept of that is like we have to start smaller to be able to have it a sustainable anything on the back end.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, because who you are to be, you're not becoming, right? So all these decisions, it's not about being perfect at all. It's like understanding that you are enough as you are as well. It's like we have these big goals and we strive for all these things, but I think the paradox of success is to know that you're enough, but always strive for more, right? It's kind of like the nature of life is growth and service in my mind.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's a core value of mine is progression always. If I'm not progressing, then I'm not doing something right. And it's looking for it though. Like what in this situation, what will help me progress? And what do I need to take away from this situation to progress? It may not always be fun. It may not always be what I want to choose, but I do have the choice to learn from any of it.
100%. Yeah, it goes kind of along the lines of perfectionism, right? Because you mentioned, doing something is better than nothing, right? A lot of us, we just think, oh, if I can't do it all, that's it. But no, it's like, it just open the door, like get in the game, right? And it's, you just go from there. It just kind of like going back to those small wins. It's always a process.
Yeah. Yeah. I was working with one of my clients yesterday, and he was expressing this difficulty, in this concept of like, he was just like, man, I just feel like, especially with my bigger projects that I know are going to take a long time. He's like, I just want to like wipe my whole day and do all of it that one day, and I'm like, well, that's not possible because of the different roles that you're holding throughout the day. Like he's also a dad and he's a husband and he owns 2 different businesses. And so there's a lot that he's dedicating himself to each day, So when I'm talking to him about this, I'm like, you can't wipe your whole thing. So you also need to set realistic expectations of yourself and be okay with that concept of like, hey, this is what I'm getting done in this bucket today. And that's great. Not that that's like good enough, because that again puts a negative connotation in our mind, but like I did this and I moved the needle this much today, and that adds up. The concept of those needle moving moments, you take that over even a week time frame and you've made great progress.
100%. Yeah. Excellence over perfection, right? It's like, it's doing these things and making progress within that, right? Because if we just apply that to everything, we're going to be amazed at the progress we actually make in our lives, because we're actually getting things done. We're taking steps towards our goals. We're just making those small wins, and all those things are going to stack up to achieve our goals over time. And it's all works together for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like when we're talking about stacking those wins and being proud of ourselves over those small things that happen each day, that also gets to like reframe our lens that we're looking out of, as far as like you get to end the day proud of what you have, your performance that day, right? You get to be proud of like, okay, maybe I had 10 things on my list and I got through 7 of those. How amazing that I had the energy and the capability to get through 7 of those, rather than being like, I left 3 things open on my list, it's almost the practice of like the art of noticing, right? If you're noticing how much you're accomplishing, your story that you're internalizing is very different than if you're noticing how many things you didn't get done, then that's what you're noticing, right? And I love that. It's the concept of like if I asked you to look around your room right now and I said, Anthony, tell me how many things in your room that you see right now that are the color white. And then you'd look around and you'd be like, okay, that. And then if I said, okay, how many red things are there? You'd be like, I have no idea because you asked me to look at the white things. Right?
Right.
It's the art of noticing because you were focused on white. You weren't focused on red. So if we're focused on the things that we have done and be proud of what we have done, it just gives ourselves the confidence and the ability to continue in that trajectory rather than noticing all of our faults or all of our misses throughout the day.
100%. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, right? Because we have these, achievement-oriented mindsets, which are great. Like it's a skill in of itself to, be successful in all these different things. But you also have to know how to be fulfilled and be at peace. And perhaps that's the most important thing, right? Because you have to appreciate what you have, right? And you kind of mentioned this earlier. It's like what you appreciate appreciates, and what you focus on tends to expand, right? Yeah. So just knowing these things and being peaceful in that moment. Like I feel like that's perhaps the most important form of currency, right? Because if you make these action-based decisions from a place of love and from a place of peace, that's where you create that momentum in your life, as opposed to like, I don't got enough, the scarcity, fear. It's like, no, it's like you want to cultivate the energy and you cultivate those decisions from that.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And it's amazing because our brains literally, like chemically, we can't process fear and gratitude at the same time. So if we are in that scarce mindset and we're going down that rabbit hole and all of a sudden like all these fearful and negative thoughts are going into play and we take a stopping moment and shift it and shift into that space of gratitude, it really is like the concept of changing of scenery. You're changing the chemical output in your brain to see those big things and see the great things. I shouldn't say big things because they don't have to be big things, but it is our brains are incredible machines. They're computers, they're machines, they're the CEO of our success of everything, right? And our capability of guiding our brains and being the operator of it. It may not be easy all the time. I'm very aware of that, but we definitely have the capability of doing it if you're giving yourself the right framework and tools to do so.
Yeah, 100%. Brains are amazing, right? There's this thing going out there. It's like, we don't have access to all of our brains. We only use like 10%, but it's not science-based whatsoever. It's like somebody in the personal development space is like, oh, you're not using all your brain, which is true. Like most of us are probably not using it to our full capacity, right? But it's important to know that we do use all of it. But to what degree, right? We have this amazing thing, right? But what are we doing to cultivate it and kind of grow our lives with that thing?
Yeah, I love that you said that. Like, what are you doing to use all of it? What are you doing to optimize what the access that you do have? And it is like when you prove to yourself, even if it is one goal that you've achieved, you've proved to yourself that greatness that you're able and capable of. And then you can expand that. And that's, I think, when we get to tap into the superpower part of our brains is when what used to be a ceiling to reach for big becomes our floor because we're growing. Like, oh, that is such a powerful experience as a human being.
For sure. I mean, it's like perhaps the most advanced object in the known universe, right? And you have one, right? So what are you doing?
Yes. Yeah, we all have one. So treat it well. And it goes back to the foundational principles that you were mentioning. Like treat it well, serve it well. Like the things you put in your body and everything. I mean, you have such high power if you treat it well.
For sure. Yeah. It's like optimizing your mind and operating at full capacity for sure. So you talked about core values. Like I want to get that a little bit. Like how do we find our core values, right? Because we all have these things that are important to us, but where we discover what kind of lights us up and kind of filter our decisions through those things as well.
Oh, I love the exercise of core values because I think it is such a powerful tool that It's not a quick exercise. I do want to be very clear about that. And like, especially people who are listening that are like, oh, I want to do that. I want to understand what my core values are. This is something that you should sit and wrestle with for a long time, because it's so important to understand what is in alignment to you and what is out of alignment to you. And so I really think like it's actually opposite of what we were talking about. When I have someone sit down to do their core values, when I was saying like, when I want you to start with a new habit, I'm going to start you with small steps. When we start with your core values, I want you to brain dump everything. So I want you to get out a piece of paper, and then I want you to brain dump everything that's important to you. Community service, family, trust, business ownership. I want you to like anything that would be of importance that you would stand by or feel or want to identify or correlate yourself with, descriptions of yourself, anything like that. This should all like be brain dumped onto a piece of paper, and it should fill up quickly. And when I say fill up quickly, maybe this is over a span of some time. When I say the word quickly, I mean it should just be full at the end of your brain dump. And this is oftentimes like it's helpful to come back to this in chunks, right? Because there are certain times when we're in a really mindful like state with ourselves, and then there's other times where like it's just not coming. And I've worked with people that have experienced both. Like I was just talking to a gentleman the other night, and he was like, Tiffanie, I'm really having a hard time brain dumping this stuff because I'm getting so held up on poor choices I've made in the past. And that was a really powerful thing for him to own and for him to be able to say. And what my explanation back to him was like, the core values that we're trying to define out right now are not correlated with your past choices. Your core values should be tied in with that future self and who you want to be, who your optimal version of you is. Is that a person of progression? Is that a person that is honest and transparent with their dealings? Who do you desire for that person to be? And it's going to take him some detaching because of some past experiences that we've talked through, but it's possible for him. His road to identifying that is going to be a little bit longer. Whereas some other folks are able to sit down and be like, my family matters, my community matters, and blah, 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 But once you do the brain dump on the piece of paper, then we get to start to pare down and see like there are some things that probably support one another, that maybe if we ask the question of, why is this on your paper? And why is this important for me? Then we get to really dial down to now a core value is sitting under there. So what I mean by that, and I'll bring up this same gentleman that I was working through this exercise with, we were looking through his list, and he had like 5 different angles of being honest. And, he was like, I want to be honest with my family. I want to be an honest business person. And he had the word honest in there like 5 different times. So I said, you can actually combine all of those together, and I want you to peel that back a little bit. The concept of honesty and transparency for you is clearly a core value for you. So you get to just put that as anything that you deal with from a truthful heart and from an honest stance, right? And he didn't need to be putting these 7 different areas down. He just wanted to talk about honesty, right? But then he had a description in there that was like, I want to financially bring in money outside of my 9 to 5. Well, when I hear that, that's not a core value. And so I wanted to peel that back a little bit. And I said, why do you want to do that? And he said, well, because I want to be a good father. And I also want to be able to be available for my kids. And I said, why do you want to be available for your kids? And we just kept asking the question of why and digging deeper. This is not a surface level exercise. This is one that you've got to ask why like 5, 6, 7 times. And when we really peeled back that statement of like he wanted to be financially creative, of bringing in money outside of his 9 to 5, the whole root of it was he wanted to dictate his time and energy. But we wouldn't have got there. And, being able to dictate his time and energy would allow him to be with his family. It would allow him to spend his money how he wants to if it's there, you know, and so it was like the concept of getting deeper of everything. So anyways, that's it gets very layered in there, but my biggest advice to people is when you're going to go down this road of trying to figure out what your core values are, wrestle with it and ask yourself the question why 1,000 times until when you land on it, you'll be like, that's why. Because I want to dictate my time. I want to be available for my family. And then you're going to find a much smaller, pared down list of what your core values truly are. And that list that you end on is the most powerful piece of data you will ever hold, because again, it lets you make decisions that are either in line with those, or if they're out of line, it's a quick no. It's no longer an emotional decision. It's just, oh, that doesn't align with me. It's a no for me.
Yeah, spot on. That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like being specific and finding your why is really important in that. Yeah, I imagine like journaling this out and really being like intentional, right? Because we have these things, but like, what is it, that helps us live in alignment and become the greatest versions of ourselves and what it's all about for real?
Yeah. And I think like visiting this often and revisiting it often to be able to understand, like, if I'm at a place where I'm just barely stepping into the personal development space, again, there's so much information out there and there's going to be so much that I'm going to be intaking. So if I do this core value exercise at the beginning of my journey, chances are that list is going to evolve into a greater and better list, not fully changed because our core values are innate, built into us as our value system, but they will evolve as we understand our greatness. So 100%. It will, a lot of these self-limiting beliefs will start to fall off of those lists, and we'll be able to put more on there of things that we are able to achieve and that will support that growth.
Yeah. All right, Tiffanie, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you so much for coming on the show today, sharing your story with us, all your amazing insights, really becoming a self-advocate, right? Becoming a leader and really integrating our lives, living with honor and integrity, right? Because once we start to build these layers of who we are and infrastructure, that's when we really start to, live boldly and, optimize everything and be of growth and be of service and all these things and help us reach our full potential, become the greatest version of us. So this has been really fun, and I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
Definitely. So if people want to get connected with you and all your work, where can we find you?
Over on Instagram is where I'm most active, and it's just Tiffanie.Janowitz. I'm gonna throw a little bit of a spelling in there, a spelling change in there with Tiffanie, but I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. So over on Instagram or my website, TiffaniJanowitz.com.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.